Jesus was once speaking to his disciples when he said, "It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for some people to enter the kingdom of God." When the disciples heard this, they asked, "Who then can be saved?" But Jesus looked at them and replied, "With man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible." The story you are going to hear today is impossible without God. If there were no God, this story goes away. If one were to tell such a story without the inclusion of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the story becomes nothing more than fantasy. It becomes a fiction. And if the storyteller insisted that this story is true, in the absence of Jesus, well, that person would not be intellectually honest with you. I assure you, the story you are about to hear is true. It is the story of, with God, all things are possible.
Welcome, friends. Pastor Dale Clayton here. I'm so glad that you joined us for another episode of the Encounter Life podcast. Your host, Pastor Kurt Ritchie, is going to continue his conversation with my friend and my pastor, Derrick West. His story, as you've been listening, is without a doubt very dramatic and exciting. However, I want you to know that your story, that your journey from being lost to found, from being an unbeliever to being born again, that your story is just as amazing. It's just as exciting. That your salvation was just as impossible as his was. Both stories, yours and his, are proof that with God, all things are possible. Now let's listen together as we hear more of the story. From pushing hope to pushing dope, the story of a kid named Dirty.
Good morning, Pastor. I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your incredibly busy schedule to share with our podcast listeners the story of your life. Without the Lord, your story would be truly unbelievable. However, with God, all things are possible. So let's continue.
Yeah, so once again, just thankful to be here. Looking forward to sharing with the community and to share with our listeners, just the saving grace of God on my life and saving grace of God on individuals' life that are willing to put him first.
Yeah, indeed. And that putting the Lord first, that's the transformation, going from not doing that to doing just that. We've already had a couple of opportunities here, a couple of episodes in this series, that we've been working along, traveling along, figuring out who Derrick West is and what your story really is all about. As I have gotten to know you over the last couple of years, it seems like every once in a while you tell a little something about your life that here's another piece of the Derrick West story that I did not know. The other day in the office, you told us about, I'd like to just begin this episode with this little tidbit. You told us that at a certain point in your young teenage life that you traveled with the circus selling cotton candy. Can you tell us about that? That's a little something that not everybody does that.
Yeah, I think I was 16 years old, and a friend of mine, we decided. We had heard that you could join Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus, that you could be a cotton candy vendor, and that you could make money selling cotton candy and travel with them to different cities. So we heard people talk about how much money they made, so we thought it'd be a good idea to join the circus.
So we
joined the circus for a short stint. We joined them when they were in Orlando. We rode up to Orlando, joined the circus. Joined him for a while, decided the circus wasn't for us, and then we threw our luggage off the train, jumped off the train, and made our way back home. But it was definitely a journey.
That's incredible. How old were you?
16.
Oh, no.
15 or 16. I can't remember exactly the age. I I think I might
How
have
does
been 15.
that, a 16-year-old kid, what were you thinking?
I thought, you know what? I mean, if you invest 50 cents and you could sell cotton candy for $1, I was like, I can make 50 cents off of every cotton candy I sell. I was already involved in selling other things. I thought, well, this is right up my alley. Maybe
what are you selling other things? I'm going from selling drugs. I'm selling selling weed to selling cotton candy.
Yeah, and I thought maybe I can make a bunch of money, and we planned to do a year tour with them, save a bunch of money, and come back home. But I didn't make it that far.
You didn't make as much money with cotton candy as you were making selling weed, apparently.
The living quarters was difficult. So, yeah, we decided it was time to go back to Wildwood. Yeah.
No, but so you went all the way to New York right, in that journey?
With Ringling Brothers Bond Lady Circus. Yeah, we did a tour and came back down to Orlando. So we started went through Mobile, Alabama, came back down. We jumped off a train.
Okay.
I can't remember exactly where at in Florida we jumped off a train.
But you decided circus life was not for you.
No, I couldn't handle it, man. You can only take a shower when the train stops. The carts weren't very big. Did
you make any money?
I spent it all. Yeah. I didn't save any. No.
That's crazy. All right. Well, let's get back to your primary story. As crazy as it sounds for you to have this judgment of, I'm not going to travel with the circus. That's not the life for me. So you decide that selling drugs, being a drug dealer, is the better life. You come back and explain that process.
Well, I started into that lifestyle when I was 15, just for my examples. I mean, my father's example,
right.
My father was a drug addict and was involved in selling drugs.
Yep.
And so I was raised in that environment. So I didn't know any other avenue. I was raised basically in a drug house. So when I was 8 and 9 years old, I was watching out for the police for my father while he did drug deals and he did things that were illegal. I was the lookout.
So when you came back from the circus, jump back into where I'm headed with this, Pastor, is at some point this became more than just a way for a kid to make a few bucks. It moved
it became a career.
Yeah, it became a career, a life. What I'm after, and we covered some of that in previous episodes. What I want to look at this moment is, was there ever this moment? How does the voice inside of your head say, but I'm not selling cotton candy is ridiculous, but selling drugs isn't? How's this working in your mind to say, I'm going to take this up to the next level? I'm going to make a career out of this.
I think when I got a little older, I think when I hit about 16 or 17, and I started to realize how much money I could make selling, hustling, I said to myself, I'm going to get serious about it. And getting serious about it, and I know I'm going to speak a language where if people listen, they understand that I'm not testifying, I'm testifying, because a lot of people say they've done a lot of things that were not accurate. I said, if I'm going to be skilled in the trade, then I need to sharpen my blade. And I started learning how the chemistry and the chemicals. I started learning how to cook cocaine to crack cocaine. I started learning all the ins and outs of selling dope to make me the best at the job as anyone could be.
So was there any point in that where you're in that process, where in your brain, in some place in your heart even, was there ever a moment when you're thinking to yourself, this is a bad idea. This may not end as well as I think?
It's funny. I never thought that, because everybody around me that was doing it didn't look bad.
So there was no hesitation?
No hesitation. It looked like it was the right thing to do.
Wow.
I mean, because you think about it, you're the product of your environment.
You are, yeah.
Everybody around you is selling drugs, and they got the nice cars and the nice clothes, and they're the what they call their ghetto famous. Everybody wants to be their friend.
Ghetto famous.
Yeah. So
wow.
Yeah.
I think about my own life, and there were things that I was doing in late high school, in that same 17, 18-year-old bracket, 16, 17-year-old bracket. There were a lot of stupid things I was doing, but along the way, I think I always recognized in the back of my mind someplace, this is stupid. I shouldn't be here. There was never a moment where you thought, I shouldn't be here.
Apparently
not.
I started thinking that towards the end, but around 16 or 17, my goal was I was going to make $1 million.
Ghetto famous $1 million.
Yeah.
So what was your moral compass like? I mean, where would you draw the line? Was there a line, a moral line where you'd think, no, that's bad. I'm not going to do that. What was your, I won't touch this.
So as far as violence, there was no moral compass. We did whatever we had to do to make money. That was the key objective, was money. One of the things that I saw in that life was the sexual morality with moms prostituting their daughters. For me as a person, I was never one of those guys that was able to what they call in the street term trick. In other words, have a mother drop off their teenage daughter to me and I pay the mother drugs to have sexual relations with the daughter. That's something I never could do. And I despised other men that did that, even though it was a common thing. So I guess if you say moral compass, I never crossed that line.
Good. So what I want our listeners to know is there was a line.
There was a line, yes.
And it's hard for us that we didn't grow up in your situation, didn't live that. I think that's always a question that our listeners would have is like, man, would this guy do anything? Was there ever, and obviously you've said, yeah, there were these moral fences in my life. So let's talk for just a moment about the expansion of your business.
Yep.
You started out in Wildwood, Florida.
Yep.
From there, Sumter County.
Yep. And
the surrounding communities. How did your business, your career as a dope dealer, did it go regional, and what was the scope?
Yeah, so it did. So I started locally, but I also got into other things. So I went to New York, and I had a short while in New York City where I got involved in the heroin trade. We were coming off of the Bronx to Providence, Rhode Island.
How do you just get in your car and you go to New York and you step out of the car? There you go.
Were selling drugs.
What's your connection?
Well, and I don't want to say names on here, but yes, but I had some connections with friends that were here. Because you got to think, Florida is a melting pot for different cultures and nationalities. And, heroin was not as big in Wildwood as it was in New York City.
So your friends here vouched for you with the network there.
I said, you know what?
And when you showed up, they were waiting for Derrick West.
We got connected, and we were moving dope from the Bronx to Providence, Rhode Island through a transportation line,
So you're across state lines. It's big time now.
It was. Here's the thing, Pastor. To say that crime doesn't pay is a lie, because it does pay. What crime does do is it leaves residue. So, I made a bunch of money, but the residue outweighed the money that I made, and you end up wasting everything and losing everything because you got to pay the piper for everything that you do.
Okay. Maybe, I don't know, this may be an untouchable. And if I'm asking a question, you say, nope, can't go there. I'm good with that. But what was at the time that you were now regionally used across state lines, can you share any idea, maybe not specifically, but generally, the dollar volume of what you were? The Derrick West drug enterprise
realistically, a lot of people will lie at this point in the game. As a kingpin, no, I wasn't a kingpin. It's up and down when you sell dope. So I think an average out prime as a 17-year-old kid, I was probably making $4,000 or $5,000 a week at 17 years old.
But you weren't yet regional at 17, were you?
No. It was nickel and dime hustler.
I'm talking about at the
prime. I was probably moving at the prime, probably 9 ounces of cocaine and crack a week, in pills. So I was probably making $10,000 to $13,000 a week.
Wow. Okay.
But I spent it all on shoes and strippers. Right.
Oh man. Well, there's the honest part of the story. Your friends in your network in New York and across the upper Northeast, how did those relationships work? I mean, because they had to have connections and.
Well, you got to think I'm a white kid. So in the Hispanic culture, you got to think how the community works. Like the police, you play the ethnicity to your advantage. So because I was a white kid, they put me in the transportation line, and the police would see a white kid driving the vans from New York to Providence. They wouldn't think nothing of it. They figured transportation line. Where if it was somebody else, it would look suspicious. So I used my ethnicity as an advantage for me in the drug trade, and it worked well for me. So I would clean myself up, look like this innocent guy, and the whole time I've got probably 2 or 3 keys underneath my driver's seat.
I've probably seen too many movies about drugs.
Yeah.
And my guess is it's probably not like this. But as you are connecting with people in the drug business, there's going to be levels of that in power and influence and money. At what did you ever walk into a room and you're looking at this person sitting behind a desk and they're all cleaned up and they're wearing the great clothes, and you walk in and you go, man, I want to be this guy one of these days? Was that no? I walked in, looked at him, and says, "Man, I'm making 3 times the money you make." Okay.
And I can do what I want to do.
Okay.
It wasn't until I had an encounter with Jesus that I thought what I was doing was wrong.
All right, man, you just touched on where I was headed. Because I would we need to make this shift.
Yeah.
We've pretty much figured out the drug dealer, Derrick West. I am curious as to what point, was there a moment, because you said that you had these moral lines, but you were good to go with the drug career. That was
right.
You didn't have any hesitation. Where was your moment of hesitation where you had that God awareness, that moral awareness that, wait a minute?
So they teach this golden rule when you sell drugs: don't get high off your own supply. And no one follows that rule. I've never met somebody that sold dope that's never dabbled in the bag. I don't care what they say. They can swear they don't. You're getting high somewhere, somehow. Okay. So I was about 25 years old. I never really did a lot of drugs. Smoked some reefer, but never got into it till I was about 25. I got saved at 27, and I had this girl, and methamphetamine came into town. No one knew what ice was. And, she told me to eat it. I ate it, and it made me really high, got me really addicted. I started using ice, but I was selling crack and coke. So I wasn't really getting high off my own supply. But what we didn't know at that time, now meth is a dangerous drug. We didn't understand the repercussions of that drug because it's a new thing coming into our area. The mental stability and all that, the instability that comes with it. But around that time, my father had died years ago. My mother was getting sick. Mm-hmm. Something started shifting in me to where you got to think, Richie, from the time I was 15 till I was 27, that's all I ever did was sell dope. Like, that's a high octane lifestyle.
For sure.
That's moving 120 miles, never staying at one place very long, driving different cars every day, multiple women, so-called friends, money up and down. And I mean, for 12 years, from the time I was 15 till I was 20, that's all I knew. So living that driven life and the environment that comes around, the betrayals, the rejection, always looking for the police, putting investigations on you. There's a lot of stress that comes with that. People say, well, selling dope's easy. It's not easy to sell drugs, to be productive at selling drugs.
And make a career out of it.
There's nothing stress-free about that because you're avoiding the robbers, you're avoiding the cops, you're avoiding women, fake friends.
Other dealers that want to take you out.
It's a mess. It's a violent mess, and you pick up residue from that. But about 26, 25, I started using a little bit. About 26, a year before I got saved, I just started. It's like my eyes were opening to my lifestyle. And one of the triggers that shifted me, I'll never forget this. I was in Moreland Park. I was in a crack house.
This is Wildwood now for our listeners.
I was selling dope out of this trailer, and it was wintertime. And about 1 o'clock in the morning, I hear a knock at the door. And there's this young lady there, and it's probably 38 degrees, with a baby, with no blanket around the child, holding the baby with a diaper, crying, freezing. and she has $7. She's like, can I get a $10 piece of crack? I'm like,
oh man.
First
Wow.
I said, why are you knocking on my door for a dime?
Here it is. Here it comes.
And she gave me the last bit of her money. The baby is hungry. I screamed at her, why are you knocking on my door for $10? And anyway, gave her the dope. She left. And I just sat there at the bench. I'm thinking, that poor child.
Yeah.
Because I was raised that way.
Wow.
And it just started really, and then a series of things started happening. It just started really messing with my head. The decay of the lifestyle that I was creating in our community and the decay of how I was raised. I was a product of my environment. Right. And now I was worse than my father ever was. And to see that before when I didn't care, because you got to think, man, I saw so many dark things.
There was a shift there. You said you were way worse than your father was, but there's that moral connection because you in that world you were way better than he was.
Right.
You were way,
my father was a crack addict. I never smoked crack. I never.
You took the culture
cocaine.
and you made a success out of it.
Right. I made some money. Yeah.
But you look at a child and you realize, wait a minute, I'm way worse. In all of my success as a career criminal, it's worse. Go ahead. You said that you see a lot.
Yeah. So I started seeing things. My eyes started opening up to the decay of I seen these young girls prostituting, people robbing each other, the residue of drug addiction and the way the children were raised.
Yeah,
and
there it is.
I think what started getting to me was I started seeing the children and what they had to go through. They didn't have a choice. And I think that started messing with my head because I would go to a house with parents strung out on crack and the kids would be in there crying or locked in a room.
And you saw yourself in those children.
Right. And I just started seeing the pain of these children. They didn't ask for their parents to be on drugs. Right. They didn't even ask to be here, but they were raised in this environment. And now both their parents are strung out and they're locked in a room with poopy diapers and haven't eaten because their parents are more concerned about getting high. Yep. I think that started messing with my head.
Okay.
Watching these children, man, and they're suffering, it started messing with my heart. I thought, man, I was that child.
Yep, you were that person.
Right.
Now, at this point, let's bring your mom back into this picture. Your mom was still alive at this time.
She was.
And what was happening?
My mom was a drug addict as well. My mom was addicted to prescription pills. She had been addicted to prescription pills from the time. Listen, my mother, we would do good. We would do good things. And my mom says, well, if you do this for me, I'll give you a pain pill. And she would reward us with pain pills. That's how dysfunctional our family was.
Okay, but your mom's health, something
started decaying. I loved my mama, man. I did, man. She was hooked on pills and she was broken, but she smoking cigarettes on a breathing machine, and she was diagnosed with lung cancer.
Yeah.
And she died after 90 days of her diagnosis. She was dead.
How did that hit Derrick West?
It messed with me because my mother was only 44 years old. And me and her were close because I'm the oldest. So she had me at 17, and me and her were really close with my father's crack addiction. She took us, we moved to different states together to try to hide from the people that he owed money to. So we were really close, and she was involved in protecting me from the lifestyle that I lived. She understood it.
How old were you when she died?
I was 27.
There we go.
Yep.
So now the pieces of this puzzle are coming together. You're 27 years old. You've lost your mother rapidly to cancer.
Yep.
She was in some ways your protector and provider, even though some of her provision seemed bizarre to our thinking. But she was your character, your protector, and she was with you through this process. She's gone. You are having these moments of reflection where you're looking at these kids that are growing up in the same environment you were in, and you're thinking, wait a minute, this is messed up.
It is.
Okay, let's go now to that. Describe in detail, and I only have bits of this, where you found your way to a church. How did that come about?
So, I'm going through this cycle of starting to look at things and starting to feel like I need to do something different with my life. I'm not sure. So a couple of things have happened during that process. I think one of them maybe was like undercover agent. I'm not sure how that went down, but I had picked up a man who I suspected was an undercover agent.
Okay.
And we began a dialogue about God and about different things. I never sold him any drugs. I dropped him off. But I was at the trailer again, and one night I was asleep and my phone rang. And it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and we kept our phones on our chest, so when we fall asleep, it would wake us up, so we wouldn't miss any money. And my phone rang, and it was an unknown caller, and there was a woman on the other line. Said, "Dirty, I want to get $40 worth of crack." And I told her, I said, "You better have all the money. Don't make me go outside in the cold and you don't have all the money." So I went outside waiting on her with a .380 pistol and a starter jacket. I'll never forget it, man. It was about 3, 4 in the morning. It was cold. There was fog in Moreland Park, and I seen this figure coming through the street lights. And I said to myself, that must be the lady that called my phone. I never saw a lady's face. Well, the person got closer, and she said, it was a woman's voice, "Dirty?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Who are you?" And she said, "Oh, Dirty, you know who I am. You bought crack off me. You were high on meth. You were running with Rabbit. You were with Rabbit, Dirty. You were with Rabbit." I'm like, "Rabbit?" I said, "I don't know no Rabbit." And I said, "I don't know who you are." She said, "Yeah, you do, Dirty. I saw you twice. I bought crack off you. You were high and you were still with Rabbit." I'm like, "What?" And I thought at that moment she's giving code to the police that she's got 2 CI buys on me. She got closer. She said, "Dirty, I saw you 3 times. She walked right past me." I started crying. Something inside of me made me cry. I'm like, crying. I'm like, 3 times. She said, "I bought crack off you. You were high. You were running with Rabbit." She walked right past me, never looked at me, just walked right past me. I remember this. And then her back was to me. She walked right past me. I never saw her again. And then she called me by my real name, and that's what triggered.
Oh, wow.
She said, "Derrick Daniel West." And I looked at her. I said, "How do you know my name?" I knew then she was the police. She said, "Derrick Daniel West, I saw you 4 times. I'm like, "Where did you see?" I said, "Where did you buy crack off me at on the 4th time?" And she said, "I didn't. You were in church." I'm like, What? She left.
What?
I sat there, man, weeping. I had a pill bottle full of dope. I put the lid back on it, put the dope in my pocket, ran inside, woke everybody up in the house. I said, "Go find that lady and bring her back to me now." We searched for her, never found her, never saw her again. Next day, I go to my house to see my mother because she had been dying of chemo. She had lost all her hair. And I never heard my mother praying in the spirit. So I go into my house to check on her because at that point, she didn't want me there. And I hear my mother praying in the spirit.
Oh, my.
So I walk past her, and she stops praying, and she says, "Derrick Daniel, is that you?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Come in here for a minute." I came into my mother, and she said, "Listen, last night I had a dream."
Oh.
And I'm going crazy because I just had this encounter last night. And I said, "Yeah." She said, "God spoke to me." I'm like, "What time did God speak to you?" It was about the same time that I had this encounter. And I said, "Oh, yeah, what did God tell you?" And she said, "God told me that it's time for me to come home, and that the one that I'm worried about the most is going to be okay." And I said, "Oh, yeah," because I knew that was me. And I said, "Oh, yeah." She said, "God spoke to me about you." I'm like, "What did he tell you? If there is a God?" And I'll never forget the way she looked at me, because she never looked at me like that ever again. With a tear in her eye and her eyes wide open, like she was so convinced, like she knew it was real. She said, "Son, God told me last night not to worry about you because you were going to preach his gospel."
Whoa.
And I went, "Are you kidding me? I'm not no preacher." I said, "Do you know who I am?" I said, "God ain't real." I said, "Look what we've gone through. Look what our family's gone through. Look at the violence, the pain that we suffer. You tell me there's a God? Man, that's so a bunch of crap. God ain't real." And I left, and I got in a car. And I was going to Royal, 229. I'll never forget it. And I had a guy driving me, and I gave him like $20 worth of dope to take me to this spot. I had this little spot that I would go hide out at. And I'm going down 462, the same road that the church is on. And we're crossing over 301 going to Royal. And I turned right on 229. I'll never forget it. And I saw the sign that said "New Life." And I looked at the driver and said, "You believe in God?" He's like, "Yeah, I think there's somebody out there, Dirty. I don't know what's out there." I said, pull into that church parking lot right there.
Wow.
It was New Life Center, Leslie Hannah. Wow. So I think it was a Monday night. There was like 4 or 5 cars in there. I said, I got to go talk to this guy. And he's like, were we at a church? I said, yeah, man, I'm going into church. So I run up to the church door. I put the pistol underneath the floorboard of the car. I put the dope in my back pocket. I go up to the door, and these kids answer the door. I thought they were bouncers, and they go and get the deacons, and I'm in the foyer of Leslie Hannah's church. I didn't know who Leslie Hannah was. And the bouncer or the deacons come out. They said, can we help you, young man? I said, yes, sir. I said, I'm Derrick West. I'm dirty. They called me dirty. I said, y'all believe in God? He's like, well, we do. I said, good. Well, I'm here for y'all to pray for my mama. She's going to die. And the people won't give us any money, won't give us treatment because we don't have health insurance. I said, we're poor. And they said, well, he said, what's your name? I said, Derrick West. And he says, hold on a second. And he came back in the foyer. He said, somebody wants to meet you. He pulled me into the sanctuary. And Leslie Hannah, I'll never forget, it was up on the stage. And the deacon says, Bishop Hannah, this is Derrick West. And Leslie Hannah looked at me. I'll never forget it. He said, Derrick West, I've been waiting on you. I said, waiting on me? He said, I knew you'd be coming. I've been waiting on you. I said, well, I don't know what you're waiting on. You can't help me. I said, do you believe in God? You pray for my mama? He said, I believe in God. He said, but I'm here. What are you here for?
Mm-hmm.
I said, man, you can't help me, man. I said, I sell dope, man. That's all I've ever done. I said, I'm a drug dealer. And I'll never forget what Bishop Hannah said to me. He said, you're a drug dealer. I'm like, yeah. He said, boy, that's the kind I like.
Mm-hmm.
And I accepted Jesus Christ that day, man, as my Lord and Savior, man. And I sat down on the steps of the platform. My phone rings. The enemy's so quick on it. A guy's on the other line saying, I need $100 worth of crack, dirty. So I forgot what I did, and I go into my back pocket to find the dope, and I had crushed the dope. I was upset that I had crushed the cookie because now I got to recook it. I looked at Leslie Hannah and said, I got to go, man. He said, okay. So I'll be seeing you. I said, I got things to do. And I left, and I got in the car, and I went to sell this guy the dope. Mm-hmm. So I had the guy take me back to my mama's house to get my truck. And I had ate some meth when I got there. I ate like half a gram of ice. And I drove down the road and I fell asleep again. I don't know how I fell asleep on the side of the road. I woke up with the sheriff's department surrounding my truck. And I had dope on me.
Wow.
And it was the second charge that I got. So I got arrested and I'm in jail and they revoked my bond. It was weird because I sit there with a public defender, man. All the money's gone. All the girls are gone. Nobody really cares when the money's gone. And a public defender comes in, man. And I told the public defender, I said, look, I just did a year. I said, look, run my charges concurrent. Give me 18 months. State time. I said, I'll do 12 months and I'll be out in no time, healthy and working out. And I was ready to do my time. I wasn't concerned about that. And the public defender looked at me. He says, we can't do that. Your mama won't live that long. And it was weird. I'm like, why? I said, how do you know about my mama? And why do you care about anything that happens with us? Because that's not normal for a public defender to say, no, they want you to go to prison.
Right.
You understand? The state of Florida wants you to have that prison ID number.
Right.
So now every time you get in trouble, they send you back to prison. And they released me that night walking. I'll never forget this. I'm leaving the jail walking, and one of the officers, Doug Strickland, picks me up on the side of the road. He's a captain there now. He says, let me give you a ride. And I went to school with Dougie. I'm like, what? Why are you giving me I said, where's my cell phone at? Why'd they take my phone? And one of the officers said, you ain't getting that phone back. It's under investigation, man. Right. You're a drug dealer.
That's evidence.
So I was walking back to Wildwood, and they picked me up, and he took me to my mom's house and dropped me off at the front door of my mama's house.
A sheriff's deputy.
A sheriff's deputy. Doug Strickland. I'll never forget it. They released you and you just walked out.
I
just walked out. It was weird.
And no explanation.
It was like the Apostle Peter was walked out of prison.
Yeah.
No explanation at all. None.
But they told you to You're good.
They
You can
opened
go.
the door, said, you can go. It said, report to Rick Costanza. He's in our church now.
Right.
It said, report to Rick Costanza.
Parole
by
officer.
tomorrow morning, parole officer. I said, Rick Costanza, I'll never forget it. I said, man, send me to prison. I said, he's going to violate me because I was on
Right.
probation with Costanza once and he violated me. All right, gave me a year. I said, man, I'm not going back to Rick Costanza. I mean, he ain't.
And he's on the church board
He's
today.
on our church board today.
Right.
I said, there's no way I'm going to him. He's ruthless. I said, this is a setup. But they opened the door. They said, you need to go see your mother. I'll never forget the sheriff's department said, you need to go see your mother.
Unbelievable.
So Dougie Strickland dropped me off at the front door of my mama. I walked in. She wakes up and she starts bawling. She's like, oh my God, it's you. It's you. You're here. You're here. I didn't think I would ever see you again. Because, she died 2 weeks later.
Oh, wow.
And she looked at me. She said, you've got to leave now. You've got to leave now. She's crying. She's hugging me. I'll never forget it. She's sick. She says, you've got to leave now. I said, Mom, I want to stay with you. She says, you've got to leave now. I said, why do I got to leave? What's going on? How did I get released? Why am I here? She says, you'll understand one day. I can't tell you, but you've got to go. You've got to go. So where do I go?
Wow.
Anyway, a guy had owed me a bunch of money. I sold dope out of his house. He owed me some money. I said, I'm coming over there to stay to work off the money that you owe me.
Right.
A guy named Gordon Boone, and it was in 229. So I stayed with him. And I reported to Rick Costanza. And Rick Costanza came to the house and looked at me. He says, I tell you what, if I even hear that you're peeing on the side of the road, it's not what he said.
I got it.
Yeah. I'm sending you to prison. I'm like, man, I said, well, I'm probably end up going to prison anyway because I just got out long enough to see my mother, say goodbye to her. 2 weeks later, my mama died. And something happened during that process though, man, because I got saved and I said, man, I started preaching in the crack house because they're all smoking crack, trying to get me to sell them dope. And I just opened up a Bible and I just started reading. I just kept reading. Well, my mom died. I'll never forget this. I sat there. My mama died. We didn't have any money for the funeral. And I remember I put my shoes on. I told God, I said, if you're really real, God, I don't know if you're real. But if you're real, you better figure out a way to pay for my mother's funeral because I'm going to go, you know what I'm about to go do. I had a guy going to drop me off an ounce of coke. I was going to jump back into it just to get some money to pay for my mama's funeral. And I walked out the house to go see my connect, and a black truck pulls up with a couple of men gets out. A man gets out. One of them was Brian Tillman. I thought it was the feds. He said, are you Derrick West? I said, I am. Who are you? He said, well, I'm Pastor Brian Tillman. I said, yeah, what are you doing? What do you want? He said, listen, man, I know this is weird. He said, but can I talk to you for a minute? And I'm walking past him. I'm like, what do you want, man? I said, yeah, what's up? He said, man, you ain't going to believe this. He said, man, a year ago, he said, a guy came in and gave me a funeral card for a free funeral. I said, all right. He said, man, I've been praying and God spoke to me. I heard that your mama had died and God spoke to me to use this funeral card on your mama.
God's provision.
Yeah. And I had just told God, if you don't pay for this funeral, I'm going back to selling dope. And my mama's funeral got paid for. And he said to me, he said, man, I'd like to move you into my church office. Like, what? Church office? I wouldn't do it. No, I'm not moving in there. I ended up going to a camper with my cousin, Jesse Mills, and he ended up dying. And that offer came again. He said, you want to move into the church office? I said, man, I really ain't got a choice. Yeah. I moved into the church office and a bunch of these preachers got around me and they started teaching me the word of God. Gary Bunn was one of them. Bishop Gary Bunn started teaching me Old Testament, New Testament survey and just went through this intense study of the Bible and just started, working with me for 2 years. And then I got off probation with Rick Costanza. Rick Costanza was very instrumental in my life, very instrumental. And the sheriff's department and Rick Costanza felt like I have to get out of here or else they're going to kill me or I'm going back to that life.
This is after 2 years of probation. No jail time.
No jail time. They released me with early release. Judge Hallman did. Released me. The state's attorney, they bring me into this courtroom. I'm the only guy there in the narcotics unit sitting there. I'm like, what the heck? That's not normal for a court case. And they get me out there. Judge Hallman says to the state's prosecutor, says, what do you got to say about Derrick West's early termination? And the state's prosecutor says, well, Your Honor, he says, we believe a lot of good things happened at the road to Damascus. So they released me off probation. I walked out the courtroom and all the narcotics units sitting right there shaking my hand. Like, what in the world is the narcotics unit shaking my hand for? So then they sent me to New York to another sheriff's department in New York.
And Rick Costanza was instrumental in setting that
and
up.
all this. So then they sent me to Watertown, to the sheriff's department in Watertown, a guy named Mike Ryan and Shane Ryan, who was on the SWAT task force in Fort Drum military base. And I stayed there, and the Assemblies of God paid for my entire education, 3 years of schooling through District School of Ministry, paid for my internship. And I started being developed into a preacher and started traveling.
Wow.
There's men instrumental. Bishop Carl Hart was very instrumental with the Church of God. And Bishop Leslie Hanna, Mike Ryan, Jerry Terry. And the funny is they're all veterans.
Well, why is that so emotional for you?
I don't know what it is with the veterans or law enforcement, but every person that's been instrumental in my life, except for Brian Tillman. Well, his dad, I lived with his dad for a year. Pop, they called him Pop. Harold
in New York?
Tillman. No, in Florida. So I stayed in the church.
Okay.
And then I lived with his dad, and his dad was a veteran. All the men that was instrumental in my life were either law enforcement or veterans.
Wow.
And there's a connection with the veterans and with law enforcement. I can't understand it, but whatever the reason, God used men that have that background to help develop me to be a preacher and to be where I am today.
Let's, this is so amazing to hear. I think this would be a good place to take a break. And for our listeners, when we get to the next episode that'll be released, we're going to introduce another person into the Derrick West story, the young now evangelist preaching, and there's a young woman that enters his life. We're gonna introduce Nicole in our next episode. But Pastor, thank you so much for your time. This has been at several moments very emotional for you, and I appreciate your tenderness of heart, but your willingness to share these details. And all for the sake of people that need help, people that may be hearing this that say, can God fix my problem? And the answer is yes. Yes. One encounter with Jesus can change everything. God bless you, Pastor. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Friends, I want to thank you for being a part of the Encounter Life podcast. Your support, your taking the time to listen, sharing with your family and friends. We appreciate all of this so very much. In the world of podcasting, it is easy for content creators to get caught up in the stats, the analytics. How many downloads did we get this week? How many listens? How many subscribers? What do our engagement numbers look like? I want you to know that, yes, we see the data, but I assure you that is not our priority. We never forget about the people behind the data. We care about you. You are not just a number to us. You are an individual with hopes and dreams, successes and failures. You have a story, and your story matters. It matters to God, and it matters to us. We hope that your life, your story, has been encouraged and inspired by the remarkable story of Derrick West. In our next episode of this series, which we'll post probably in about 3 weeks from now, we are going to hear the story of Nicole West, Derrick's wonderful wife. We are going to hear her side of the story. We are going to hear how, while God was working in the life of a career drug dealer in Florida, the Lord was also working at the very same time in the life of a beautiful young woman in upstate New York. We are going to learn how God was preparing both of them for this work, His work, a work they would do together, the work of preaching the gospel of Jesus to a lost, confused, and messed up world. We are going to hear the story from groupie to grace. Be sure to like, follow, and share this podcast with your friends. And always remember, one encounter with Jesus can change everything.